Hi, good morning. Welcome to Angels, God, and Me, and I'm your host, Mary Amy, coming to you live. I agree with the notion of compassion to all living things. We are all connected. Our actions matter. Karma is a cycle of cause and effect. Virtuous actions create happiness, and non-virtuous actions create suffering. The forces of good and evil are prevalent in our daily lives, yet angels are celestial, immortal beings traveling from the heavens to earth, protecting humanity. Perhaps the conversations of angels with humans throughout history suggest existence. Those prophets and saints speaking of divine visions delivered messages of hope. Truly with hope, we can endure most anything we encounter. On today's show, we cover topics related to myths and legends, real-life phenomenon, empathy, a visualization, helpful tips to inner peace, and we have a guest, Daniel Alan Jones, who's a UFO investigator. But before we bring on Daniel, I'd like to give you and share with you a Buddhist prayer, which I need. It's been a little bit of a rough week, but here we are. Okay, so this Buddhist prayer, I'd like you to focus on the meaning. It's about the four immeasurables. And the four immeasurables are loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, which is calmness. The prayer is, may everyone be happy. May everyone be free from misery. May no one ever be separated from their happiness. May everyone have equanimity, free from hatred and attachment. Okay, I am going to share with you a visualization. So here we go. I like to do this before I bring on the guest and help us to kind of clear away any negative energy that we have attached to us before this moment. We will create vivid mental images in our mind's eye, bringing positive emotions such as joy, happiness, and hope. Blessings. Our intention today is to awaken our consciousness through a source of light. Let's realize connecting your mind, body, and spirit to divine light will shed darkness in yourself and unblock your true purpose and passions. Your light visualization begins now. Please find a quiet space, sit or lay down comfortably. Close your eyes. Now let's begin to relax our mind and body. Let's breathe out old energy and thoughts and deeply breathe and inhale and exhale 3 times. I'd like you to scan your body for stress and tension from the top of your head, your crown chakra, to the tip of your toes. I'd like you to imagine you're standing on a green meadow surrounded by flowers of vibrant colors, yellow and purple and red. Wanting one, you begin to reach down to grab one. Pausing before you pull it from the field, you realize it's too beautiful to take and you acknowledge the beauty of nature. You leave behind the flower. Now your attention draws you to an extraordinary beam of light on the horizon. In the distance, you see this translucent light on the horizon. It's not giving off any heat, and the light calls to you to walk towards it. As you move closer, you're not sure how long this will take, but you know you are destined to reach it. As you walk, you feel free and alive. And you understand the need for its presence in your life. To this light, you are perfect and forgiven of all your flaws. You breathe out old hurts and anxiety and fears. I'd like you to stay in that moment of acceptance and contentment. You're exactly in the right place. You're perfect just the way you are. I will count backwards to 3, and you will open your eyes, and you will feel more relaxed, and you will have brought light into your being. 3, 2, 1. I think I do that for me too. Okay, so this is exciting. Today's guest is a UFO investigator, and he also investigates many, many mysteries. He's coming from Texas. So let me tell you a little bit about what I found out related to UFOs. So a UFO is an acronym for, here's a photo from, I think it's from the 1950s, unidentified flying object. In 1953, the United States Air Force, in some cases, I'm going backwards. In the 1940s and 50s, UFOs were referred to as flying saucers, and they made up something called Project Blue Book, which studied UFOs. And here's a photo that I found, and it was conducted by the Air Force in 1952. And the goals were to, 1, determine if UFOs were a threat to national security, and 2, to analyze UFO data. There was thousands of reports. They terminated Project Blue Book in December 1969. And in 1953, the Air Force said that some of the cases remain restricted. Now, I found, this is interesting, so interesting. Okay, I'm gonna pull up. Okay, let me just hide this so that I can pull up. Now, in April 2020, during the pandemic, the Pentagon released 3 videos taken by Navy pilots, and this is a photo from one of the videos. One of the videos was from 2004, and then the other 2 were from 2015. And there was aerial objects that the pilots were unable to identify, and they were unusually shaped and fast-moving aircrafts. I'm totally going to ask Daniel about this, and we're going to bring Daniel on. So I'll hide that for now. Okay, so our guest today is Daniel Alan Jones from Texas. He's a UFO investigator, creator of The Vortex, which is a media platform that he hosts, and it's on YouTube. You should totally check it out. He has so many cool videos. He's participated as a speaker on countless documentaries, conferences, podcasts about UFOs, discoveries, strange phenomenon, extraordinary subjects, and author of the soon-to-be-published Mythos, which I might be pronouncing incorrectly because I butcher words. So let's welcome Daniel Alan Jones. Where are you? Oh, you're coming on. Hi. How are you?
Hey, Mary. Good to be with you here today.
I can't hear you.
There
you are.
Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through all right for you?
I can hear you. I'm not, you're coming through all right. I don't know. Right. It's all good. I can hear you, and that's all that matters.
Well, I'm glad to be here with you today. Really appreciated your meditation earlier. And so I'm glad to be here on your show with you.
So cool. You know what? We're a little off, I think, with the words and for a minute it goes in and out. So when you're speaking, I won't interrupt at all, which I tend to do.
No problem. And that was a good introduction. It's something I think is good to be able to do when we're talking about the subject of UFOs, because some people might have an idea, usually starts to conjure up the picture of alien spaceships and things, but really gets into a much more broad view of what the subject entails. So we can really get into these subjects in a much more exclusive look today. And so I'm looking forward to all the different topics we cover, because like you said, I host and produce a show called The Vortex, which I cover a lot of different topics. I interview different people, go out on location, and many of those videos are just available for free for mostly anyone on my YouTube channel, which is called The Vortex. So we can get into a lot of different subjects. Now we want to focus on UFOs today and talk about a few things like you'd mentioned, which things have been brought up here lately in the mainstream media and in the New York Times about certain things that the Pentagon and the government has come out with their UFO investigation program.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that you mentioned Blue Book or Project Blue Book, which is one of the earlier government programs that investigated UFOs. And this is something that ended up being sort of made into a dramatized show on the History Channel. And that was with Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was a professor who worked with the Air Force in order to investigate these UFO cases and basically kind of put them to rest and give people a better, like, clear idea about what they're dealing with in a way that's not threatening or going to be something to cause a lot of panic or attention. So these were often a lot of times dismissed, and the cases weren't really addressed in a way that he felt was appropriate. So Dr. Hynek later on went to establish the Center for UFO Studies, and this is something that continued well throughout the years after Blue Book and got a lot of attention of other people in the field of what we call ufology, and those who study that are ufologists as well. So I was fortunate enough to actually at some point meet Hynek's son, one of his sons. Wow. And he was one of the consultants for the show, as well as Jacques Vallée, who was a close colleague of Dr. Hynek's, and they actually worked on many cases together to basically look further into this field of ufology and what UFOs are altogether. And if there's a component that we're not really being considerate of that we need to look into further, rather than just the nuts and bolts physical aspect of what are these objects, what are these strange objects we're seeing in the sky. It might be the physical craft, it could be some kind of other phenomenon that we're not being considerate of that we need to look further into. And I think that consciousness is a factor that was often overlooked in the early investigations. And so we can kind of take a case-by-case basis or look into some of the things that I've been involved with in a way that show that there are a lot of things to really consider or reconsider when we're looking at this field, studying these mysterious subjects in a way that maybe there are other issues at play that we didn't really think about before, or that we might need to understand what's going on overall and how we connect with the rest of the world.
Okay, so wait, let's backtrack here. That was a lot. Okay, so this doctor who worked on the Project Blue Book, and then you said that you met his son, right? And then they did a show on the History Channel. Did they find that any of this was legitimate? Did they find that any of was it not pursued enough to know whether or not these were really UFOs?
Right. I think that there's a few things to sort of clarify with a study like that, which is the main attempt one of them was to find out if these were a threat to national security, a threat to defense secrecy, a threat to our nation in general. And for the most part, they were not really as conclusive in determining if there was really any major threat in a way that they felt should be publicized, at least because that would have instilled mass hysteria and maybe panic. And so nothing was really determined enough to say that there was a threat out of the phenomenon, but nevertheless that they did determine that there actually was a very real UFO phenomenon. That shouldn't be argued. And even still to this day, people are sort of disregarding of the subject altogether because it's played down. It's sort of something that sometimes is usually, other than in more recent times, has been sort of made a mockery of, unfortunately, in the media. It's a big topic in cinema and Hollywood and games and things like that, in a way that it sort of is not really a realistic area that people take seriously. Right. And unfortunately, that does a lot of ridicule toward the people who were involved in this area in a way that maybe they don't seem to have a lot of credence, or they're not really given the seriousness that maybe they should be afforded, because it's something that's usually made fun of. So like you said, the main thing to consider with Project Blue Book is that they did determine that the phenomenon is real, but that most of the cases they were able to either say, this wasn't conclusive enough to say that it's anything extraordinary or otherworldly, or they were able to explain a lot of it, or a lot of it was sort of written off. And as I kind of mentioned and alluded to earlier, Dr. Hynek, after being involved with Blue Book, went on to continue looking into UFOs because he felt like they were really, as this is sort of also depicted in the show, which is a little bit more embellished, but they basically just wanted to play them down and not really look into them in a way that was as serious as maybe Hynek would have liked to. So it's something that he continued later on to look into because he felt that there was a reality to the phenomenon, that there was something that wasn't being addressed, and that people really needed answers that the government wasn't giving them, which is ironic because that's exactly what we're seeing today with some of the groups that have been mentioned in more recent times.
Okay, a couple things. Do you, from your research and your discoveries, have any of these UFO incidents? Is there any crash materials? Have you seen any evidence that this is a real thing? Like besides the photos, like this more recent release in April. Have you seen anything yourself personally that is evidence of UFOs?
I think it's something you have to look at in a few different ways. And for myself personally, I don't ever tell people that I've had a sighting that I would say is substantial enough to really say that is worthy of trying to make a big deal about. But I have seen a few things. I've seen some things that were questionable that I couldn't identify myself. And again, that's the whole point of why we use the term UFO. If it's something that I don't know, but maybe you do, to me it's a UFO, to you it's not. And I think that's something we all have to realize is it's a subjective term. And it doesn't necessarily mean one thing. It's an umbrella term that means a lot of things. And so I have seen some mystery lights. We have what here in Texas called the Marfa lights. And those are a mysterious phenomenon that's been an ongoing phenomenon for over a century. As far as we can see, it's something that's been going on since before there were even roads around in modern technology to be able to do anything like that we can tell. And so that's not necessarily the typical UFO in most people's mind that usually is envisioning this picture of a flying saucer or something like that. This is more of a light or a few lights actually that aren't really up in the sky, but that are out miles out into the desert that sort of move around in a very strange, sporadic way, together in synchronicity, changing colors often. You have yellow and red and different shapes that kind of form out of a little sphere of light, and nothing too drastic that seems to be coming right over you or anything like that. They're way out in the distance. But to me, I can say that I've seen those on a number of occasions. And what's interesting about those is that, and this is also something I think is important to mention when you're talking about investigating UFOs or reports of UFOs, is that usually people see something strange. They have an object in the sky. They don't understand what it is, and they have it happen once, and that was it. When you go look at something like the Marfa lights, it's there almost any time. We could go out there right now, and if it's still dark enough, we might be able to see them. So that's something we have to be considerate of, is that a lot of these cases happen once, and it's not something that's going to be a repeating issue. But with the Marfa lights, that is something you can go see. And even though it might not be a big spaceship, and who's to say it's not, but I personally think that it could be something different. So that's what we have to be considerate of, is that while UFOs in and of themselves are a very real phenomenon, what they are is something we have to be a little bit more careful about figuring out. And so when it comes to understanding how this works through different cases, we can start to accumulate evidence, and some might say anecdotal evidence, to basically, how I would see it, is be able to bring it before the government or a court of law to pass, legally, is the way that can be acknowledged. And I think it's something you have to look at across the board, because it's not just about seeing strange objects in the sky. You have eyewitness testimony on multiple occasions where it's not just some civilian or just somebody out, in the the woods or just someplace remote. You have government officials, you have military personnel, law enforcement, all kinds of different credible people who I think are more often sought after than just anybody who might be able to make up a story. So the credible eyewitness testimony is really important. You do have a lot of interesting technical readouts like radar data and a lot of mapping and basically a lot of technology uses that can help us understand what's going on with obtaining evidence in that way as well. You have different reports of basically what we refer to as abduction experiences, which are going to be kind of put into a different category, but also sort of fall into this same thing as well. And then you have different things that I think help to establish where we are when it comes to, as you mentioned, crash materials, crash retrievals, which is something that has been hinted at in this more recent article by the New York Times, which it's kind of interesting because the title of their article is "Do We Believe in UFOs?"
Mm-hmm.
That's the wrong question,
Mm-hmm.
because they and one of the co-authors of these articles that the New York Times has been putting out about UFOs.
Mm-hmm.
Her name is Leslie Kane, and I've met with her a while back. It was last year at some point. We did an interview together to talk about the reality of this and how it is being a subject being affected and ridiculed by basically the mainstream media, and how a lot of people just don't really think of it seriously, but it's something that is getting a lot more attention because of the government coming out at the end of 2017 with the Pentagon saying we do have a program. And then later, this year, we basically have more articles coming out to help with that. For instance, you have the original article called Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program. And this is something that they talk about a few different military cases, which we can get into a little bit. And of course, they have another one called No Longer in the Shadows. The Pentagon's UFO unit will make some findings public. So the next thing is that this is also something you kind of showed a little bit earlier. You have the declassification of government and military files,
Mm-hmm.
which is, I think, a really important part of being able to bring people forward and say, look, this isn't just a hearsay topic. I mean, some people have their own stories, some people have experiences, and we shouldn't disregard those because of their backgrounds or whatever. I mean, we can question them, we can look into them, investigate, look further into whatever aspect of those. But it's also important to say that these are things seen by very real, serious, and professional people, both in
Mm-hmm.
government and in military, and is not really something that they, I mean, kind of depending on who you ask or talk to, think is just a sort of joke or like an inside joke type thing that
Right.
it's just a silly topic. To them this is very real. And when it comes to the military, as a big issue with defense secrecy, national security, and how we understand if this topic, if these objects are threats, and who they belong to and where they're from. So I think you have a good case for understanding, again, just eyewitness testimony. If there's trace evidence through crash materials or technical data and radar readouts, you have corroborating government and military documentation of these different topics and cases, different crashes or different sightings, things like that, in different places all over the world as well. And you can go further into different studies that have been done with people who have claims of abduction experiences or interaction with non-human intelligences,
So, Daniel,
and many different things.
Okay, wow, that was, you told me so much that I didn't even imagine. I want to ask you, I know there's the two concepts. There's UFOs and then there's aliens, and you just brought that up, and I did pull up this photo, and I know it's a little silly, but can you see it, like with the alien?
Yeah. So
I
this
want
is.
But I want to ask you, and I'm just using that as something for everyone to look at. Do you put the two together? I mean, you're bringing up alien abduction and the UFO. I know, I mean, are people kind of put them together have you experienced anything related to any kind of aliens or come across that during your work, or are you primarily working on learning about UFO sightings?
Yeah, I think that it is an important component to consider when you're looking into this subject. It sort of does fall into the overall topic of ufology, the study of alien or extraterrestrial life. And in scientific circles, we have what are called EBEs, which are extraterrestrial biological entities, and even groups connected to NASA, like SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and a lot of these other astronomy groups actually take this topic pretty seriously. But a lot of times it's not something that's usually thrown into ufology. It's more of a scientific endeavor to see how we can understand different types of life and other environments and other worlds. And then that's sort of a different area of what we can look into. But when it comes to UFOs and reports and then abduction experiences, things like that, there are actually quite a few that I think are worth looking into. A lot of people probably already know about in some way, but maybe through media or through Hollywood and things like that. A good example would be a story of a man in Arizona who got struck by a beam of light from a ship or an unknown object that was in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest, that they thought was what they referred to as a fire in the sky, which is the name of a movie which came out about this very case. And his name was Travis Walton. And in 1975, he got struck and hit with a beam of light from this object. And he claims to basically have been aboard this object for 5 days and seen small entities that were non-humans. And this seems to be typical of what people refer to as the grays. And so you have a lot of these different types of non-human entities that I think are a commonality in the field of ufology. Some people usually refer to the grays as these sort of small, less than like 4 to 3 foot tall, very thin but large bulbous head with dark black eyes, gray or like light and color and complexion, and don't seem to do things the same we do as far as speak or move. And so there are a lot of different physiological issues that I think are important to think about.
What do you mean when you said you're talking about aliens? You're saying that the representation tends to be small?
Right. I think that for the depiction, descriptions given for these entities, whatever they are, if they are aliens, or some people think that it could be some other type of entity that could be biomechanical, like robots or super advanced, super intelligence, AI, maybe time travelers, something like us from the future. There are a lot of different alternative theories when it comes to ufology that a lot of people don't consider. A lot of people just throw it into the category of it's aliens. So, I mean, it's interesting because it does touch upon a lot of things which make us think about situations that we might not normally consider. In this picture here, it's kind of fun. I took this in the Denver airport. It actually says, "Yes, Den's got some secrets," which this is sort of a marketing stunt. Some people actually do consider that there's a huge underground complex under the Denver airport that is housing all kinds of secretive things, and maybe there is, but it's definitely not accessible by like public means. The main thing to remember is that it's interesting to see that they would even come out with something. Then this is just one of many different like wall murals that they had. I don't know if they're still there, but it basically says, the subtext there says, since the airport's opening in the 1995, there have been endless rumors and theories. People say our underground tunnels lead to secret meeting facilities for the world's elite, and our blue horse is thought to be cursed, and some believe we're connected to the New World Order and the Freemasons and home to lizard people, which is a nod to another type of alleged alien species, which people talk about, the lizard people, or the reptilians. So
reptilians.
So there are a lot of different, I think, aspects when it comes to understanding UFO areas of study. You have not just the flying objects, but you have the different aspects of non-human intelligence, which is a really important part to this, because some of these cases, like the Travis Walton one, I've met with Travis on a number of occasions. I've been to the exact location that this happened in Arizona.
The beam of light?
Right.
Okay.
And so, and again, they made a movie out of this experience, and it's called Fire in the Sky. And again, this is something that is probably one of the most well looked into cases of abduction experiences, where he's gone with most of all the other coworkers that were there with him that saw him get struck by this light from the object, and have done several polygraph tests and have passed. And so there's a lot to that, but let's just move on for a moment. That's a really important case. I wanted to mention that because Travis is a big public figure in this community of ufology, and he's outspoken about his experience. But you also have people like Calvin Parker, who had something happen just a few years prior and in Mississippi, and it's known as the Pascagoula incident, where he was out fishing and had an object come down, and very, very bizarre entities came out, and they basically were non-humans as well. And this is another case that has a very similar circumstance that parallels Travis's a little bit, in that he was taken against his will, and then eventually brought back. And that's one of the things that we have to think about is what this means for us, because it seems like there's a lot of challenging thoughts when it comes to why people would need to be taken, and what sense does it make to be brought back, if that's even an option, or if there's even a sense of like sympathy for people at all. And so when we think about how these different entities would interact, there are a lot of things that we like to personify about our own behavior that we instill in these ideas about us. And so in another sense, another friend of mine, Terry Lovelace, he had an experience also in the 70s, a few years later, in Devil's Den, Arizona, where he was exposed to a large triangular craft, several blocks long, as he describes it, which he was eventually, it seems, taken aboard as well, and then subjected to by another sort of abduction experience with non-human entities. So once you stack up the cases where people have not only the experience of encountering non-human entities, and I say that because to suggest that they are aliens is still something that we can't necessarily substantiate. At least I think it's fair to suggest that we can at least say that they're non-humans, as far as we can tell. Are they aliens? Perhaps. I think that it's worth considering, but we don't want to jump to conclusions. We really need to do better research, I think, because there are a lot of speculative areas in this field that I think people like the ideas of and are more apt to be suggestive of that. So it's really important, I think, that we steer clear and be level-headed when it comes to our scientific approach in these matters, so that we don't dilute the material or the information that we're dealing with in a way that is going to lean one way or the other. We just need to go with the facts, and in doing so, we can also look into other reports and experiences that people have had, or if there's anything that's tangible from the governments and is suggestive of this. And I think that one of the things that's important to consider is that this is a case I looked into as well. This happened back in '55 in Del Rio, Texas, actually just near Del Rio, Texas, which is kind of near the Big Bend area, down in southwest Texas. And basically, this is where an object was seen by a number of pilots who were in F-86s escorting a bomber, and they were doing just nuclear test runs, basically to keep us safe. They saw an object coming down from the Pacific Northwest, traveling southeast, and it changed trajectory. They described it as being bright as a star. There was a Colonel Robert Willingham who was flying one of the F-86s who requested permission to pursue the object and did so. It changed direction, and its direction changed now to southwest and went down right over the Texas-Mexico border, right past Del Rio. He came back and went back in a training plane later on and landed to find that this object had crashed, and there was a long trail of debris and a collected mass of concentration that was sort of the remaining bulk of the object, which he at that point discovered that there were several people around, and Mexican officials and people that were in military uniforms guarding the wreckage. And this is just one example that I think is important to mention, because everyone knows for the most part, has an idea about the Roswell incident, the alleged Roswell crash of 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico. And the story behind that essentially is that generally people think that some unknown object crashed and that the remains of non-human bodies were recovered. But there are different theories with that as well that we can maybe try to investigate other aspects of. But when it comes to the 1955 case of the Del Rio UFO crash, Colonel Robert Willingham was able to get a closer look at the wreckage and the remains of the wreckage enough to see that this seemed to be a hull, and there was a crack in the hull which he could peer into, and he described seeing basically three entities that were not people like we are, and had arms like broomsticks and were very thin with small heads and large eyes and slits for mouths. And he said two of them were badly mangled, at least, and were probably dead. And of course, what's interesting is, to fast forward, I was able to go to this area with a good friend of mine, a few friends of mine, Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte, who were also thorough investigators of this subject as well. And that case particularly, they wrote a book on called The Other Roswell, because it's quite particular that, a lot of people don't realize there are a lot of crash cases very similar to the story of Roswell. And in this one particularly, later on, it had been announced that through one of the scientists who was contracted to work with the Department of Defense and one of their UFO investigation groups, which we can talk about, he suggested, when being asked on the syndicated radio program Coast to Coast AM if there are any crashes and which ones might there be, he said, well, if you had to bet on it, Roswell would be one and the Del Rio crash would be another. And I think that says a lot for a very serious, credible scientist named Dr. Eric Davis to come forward and suggest that not only Roswell was a real crash retrieval, but Del Rio is a real crash retrieval as well. And in my mind, looking at the whole case altogether, I think that it's important to note that, and just to have actually been there and to have seen the location, we're talking about the border of Texas and Mexico, which is the Rio Grande Valley. It's an enormous gorge of an area with a geographic diversity. You would have to get several very large helicopters over there and probably other things to basically pack up what was left of all the debris and haul it off and get it back over to the States into some facility. Some people might say places like Wright-Patterson and Dayton, Ohio house different wreckage. But wherever they did take it, the main thing is to remember in this is that it's not just that we have the wreckage of an unknown object or exotic material, but someone's got those bodies. And if Colonel Robert William is correct in his assessment of them not looking like people like we are, then they're probably from somewhere else, or they're probably some other form of intelligence that we don't really know much about, at least in the public. So at this point, there could be someone deep within a shadowy government agency or the military industrial complex that has a better idea about the nature of these entities or beings than what is presently known in public circles like NASA. So we're looking at private sectors. We're looking at how these private corporate sectors are helping to fund military programs that are enabling this research at a deep, dark level that's clouded in secrecy, that sometimes never reaches the light of day. So my main concern is that there are tangible pieces of evidence out there in the form of metamaterials, which are the exotic materials and metals used in these objects, and then the biological specimens that are recovered as well, like these bodies, or whatever we might be dealing with when it comes to understanding what these entities are. So I think that there is very real, tangible evidence out there. And the Del Rio case is just one that I've personally investigated, have been to, and there are a number of others as well. I think it's really an important aspect to looking into what this phenomenon really does consist of.
Daniel, the materials that these, whatever, I want to say, the UFOs are made from? Are all the materials spoken for? Do we know what they're all? I mean, are they? Is there any part of this that's you can't figure out? You've never seen this material before?
Well, I think for most people, for all the lay people out there who aren't scientifically inclined, most all of it's not going to make any sense. When you take it in to get testing, I think that's when you start to see a lot of unknown alloys, and things that aren't common or aren't native to Earth. And I think that's something that the people and scientists like Dr. Eric Davis, who are studying metamaterials, are looking into at a very serious level. And not only that, but of course, when you're contracted by the military, the whole point is usually going to be to exploit those materials and to engineer them to something usable. And whether it's for military use or whatever other forms of technology, a lot of people suggest that these metals are being used to back engineer or reverse engineer crashed craft in order to basically make some kind of new object that we can use. I'll backtrack a little bit because the picture you have looks like the gravestone, and this is a fun story that is something that I think a lot of people have probably heard parts of or bits and pieces of, because if you've looked into ufology to any degree, you might have heard of the story of the UFO crash in Aurora, Texas, of 1897. And this is something that's interesting because it predates modern aviation. A lot of people are dismissive of it because it could have been a hoax written up by the people writing the papers, which it was published in the papers and the Dallas Morning Herald, and the Fort Worth Register.
Was this where the pilot was burned and then they buried him in a local cemetery?
Right, and so that's basically the story, is that in 1897, an object crashed in Aurora, Texas, exploding while hitting a windmill and leaving a huge wreckage of debris, which was later thrown into the well, which was connected to the windmill, and the remains of a body were recovered. And the remains were basically so badly disfigured that they were able to determine, at least as far as the newspaper says, is that it was not an inhabitant of this world, and that they gave it a formal Christian burial in the local cemetery just down the road. Right. Now, this is a fantastic story. I've looked into this a lot, probably more than most people, because not only do I live nearby, I can go there. I've held tours there. I've talked to people, and I worked closely with Jim Mars, who is gone now, but we're fortunate that he did a lot of work in this area to be able to show that there could very well be something to it as well. I think that the main takeaway of this is that the body was never actually excavated. They attempted to do so in the 70s, and so again, this is a case that predates even the Wright brothers by 6 years. Mm-hmm. So it's something that, we're in a time frame where there really shouldn't have been anything in the sky like this. If this actually did indeed happen, then it shows us that this could very well be something that we could look further into, because there is tangible evidence out there. It's just hard to find, and it would be the metal. And some of the metal had been tested early on, and they think they found higher concentrations of zinc and aluminum, which at the time aluminum wasn't really produced in a widespread manner that most people would have had access to. And to suggest that finding metal to have aluminum in its contents is a little bit weird and out of place. And so finding things that are out of place or exotic seem to be a common theme in this area, but it's not always the case when it comes to this. Some people think they've got something special, and it just turns out that it's maybe a little unordinary, but nothing really too otherworldly. So that seems to be something we have to be careful of, because it's easy to jump to conclusions. It's fun to think about ideas, and stories like the Aurora crash of 1897 are really interesting. And today, the town is sort of like a mini Roswell. They celebrate and embrace the story that is the modern gravestone. You can go to the cemetery today, and you'll probably see a bunch of coins and little trinkets and things littering, scattered all over the grave. But it's something that, is still debated, even with things like that, because some people think it's settled and it's been put to rest. But really, it's just one of the things that I think, because there aren't any living witnesses to anymore, and no one's going to be able to dig up the grave, then it makes it difficult for us to do anything tangible with.
I appreciate that you dig deeper, where the UFOs and the aliens subject matter is exciting and interesting, and like you said, Hollywood makes stories about it and movies and television shows, and then you're someone who digs deeper to find out what really is this, to clarify exactly, is it something that you need to research further and investigate, or is it just I don't know, is it real? I guess I think that you support a part of our world that helps us to believe that anything's possible, and I love that, because to me anything is possible, and you give it credibility. The way you describe your experiences, I really, really appreciate, because it's not something I can do. And you do it, you define everything in a very scientific way. Oh, you have a friend, Tom Thomas. He says, hi, Daniel. What's up? Awesome presentation. I've been to Aurora with Daniel. We went to a crash site in Edinburgh.
Yeah, that's my buddy Tom. Yeah, that's hey Tom, it's good to have you here with us. That's my buddy Tom. Basically, like he said, we did go to we've been to Aurora before, but we also went to another location here in South Texas called Edinburgh.
Mm-hmm.
And they had another incident that I think is worth mentioning. My buddy Noe, who I went with to Del Rio, he actually lives in Edinburgh, and we went down there. They do a big annual conference. It's a really well put together event, but we went to the event is because they have a crash story, or a UFO story there, where it seems like something crashed or exploded in the sky in 1966, where 8 construction workers from Dallas had something so tremendous happen that they basically all just up and left, and there was just wreckage and debris. So Tom and I and a few other UFO investigators, including Noe Torres, were out there doing some investigating and scanning to see if there's any wreckage or any debris there, which is tangible. And that's basically one of the things you have to do as a reporter or investigator, is do the field work. And I think that you have to also take an archaeological approach as well, which is another field that I'm fascinated by, because when you're just an armchair researcher and you're just looking at stuff online, and I can't really point any fingers, because I make YouTube videos and I post articles and I share social media stuff. So I realize that it's a great resource, but we have to do more. We have to allow that to be able to bring us together, to get out into the field and look into these things ourselves in whatever capacity we can. And I just hope that my contributions have been meaningful enough to help inspire other people in any way that is imaginative or encouraging to think of what is possible, like you said. So thanks to people like Tom, we've had a great time going out and looking into these things physically in a way that helps us see that maybe there's more to it, that we just have to go out there and really figure out. Because and like I say in a lot of the Vortex videos, we won't know if we don't go. So someone's got to get out there and figure this stuff out.
Well, I appreciate you, and I think we all appreciate you going out and investigating these sightings. I want to mention before we go, I want to mention that you're a member of the Texas Cryptozoology Network. You're also a member of the Texas UFO Network and the DFW MUFON. Is that right?
Right. So yeah, those first two ones that you mentioned, the Texas pages, Texas Cryptozoology Network and Texas UFO Network, are pages that I've actually founded, and I just admin on Facebook. And we like to share and network different things that are going on in our state and beyond, whether it's events, sightings, reports, interesting encounter information, just scientific studies in general. It helps us to just stay up to date and stay informed on just different areas of interest, so that people don't just resort to just the most wild information and take it for face value. Like I said before, we really need to take a better approach in our research methods, understand that there is a scientific process behind these things in a way that helps us to understand more about the reality we exist within, and hopefully help us understand more about ourselves and our place in all of this as well. Because that's, I think, the main idea behind this is that we can look into UFOs, we can look into strange encounters, and other creatures and other legends and myths and things like that. But I think the main issue of all of this is to see how we fit into it and what we can learn about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So would you say those two are a network that someone would contact about sightings? If someone had a sighting, what would they do? Let's say someone had an experience and they wanted to contact someone related to this. Who would they contact?
My first recommendation is call the police. I mean, that's the main number one thing that's going to give you the ability for tangible proof is that you have a police report that you filed, and then you can call the subordinate groups, like you can contact any of the pages that I'm part of, or contact MUFON, or contact any other UFO reporting agency. There are a few here in Texas. There are a few in other groups. But I think the main thing is if you're in harm, if you feel threatened, the first thing you should probably do is contact some kind of official agency, or be able to file an official government document. That way you have a breadcrumb trail that shows that you have been on top of this and that you're first waited to get a hold of anyone. I mean, this is the thing. We always have to remember, one of the only ways we know anything about this subject is because the people that have had experiences, that have had encounters, have come forward and were courageous enough to bring forward their story and share about it. Think about all the people who never did that, or who feel too ridiculed or scared or suppressed to be able, or intimidated, to be able to say anything. So, thanks to everyone who's ever come forward with any of these types of stories or accounts or experiences, because that's what we have to go off of sometimes. Otherwise, we don't have much to work with. So it's all about how we can share those experiences. So, go to the proper channels, whether you want to report a UFO to MUFON or to the Texas UFO Network if you're in Texas, or you can go to other pages. Social media is a great way for us to connect in a way that we can put those experiences out there and let people know. And they're the same thing. Some people see strange creatures they don't understand, and some people might. So that's why I have a zoology page where we can help to basically understand and identify various species that we come across and encounter out in the wild, whether it's something totally mundane and normal that we just don't know what it is, or it's something super extraordinary and anomalous that we're trying to figure out. I think it's a good opportunity for people to network, get connected, and allow for us to be able to see what we can do to learn more about what we're discovering in our world.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I can't wait to rewatch this myself. I'd like to tell everyone that you can find Daniel on his Instagram, which is Daniel Alan Jones. And I do have it on the post, your Facebook, Daniel Alan Jones page, and then your YouTube, The Vortex with Daniel Alan Jones. Is there anything else you would like to say regarding your contact information?
That's pretty much it. I mean, you can check out whatever videos I've produced on the YouTube channel, The Vortex. And of course, I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And for anyone who's interested in finding out, whatever information about what we've discussed here today, or if they have something they want to ask me about, I'm an open book. I love to be able to interact with people. And as you mentioned in the intro, I do have a publication I'm working on getting out called Mythos. And that's stands for mythological or mythical operating system. And that's going to be something that covers a lot of these different areas of strange and mysterious phenomena, and also where it's going with new technology, new developments in science, and where the world could be in our near future when it comes to understanding these mysteries. Because the more we learn, the less mysterious our world seems to be. And we have to understand that can mean a lot of things for us when we start to discover new things, and when we encounter something that isn't really a conventional part of our world, and we're confronted with something mysterious, how we go from there. So I'm excited to be able to get that out here pretty soon. That's going to be both like ebook and then physical book copies as well. But other than that, it's been really interesting to be able to talk about some of these different issues, and I think it's something we have to keep an eye on. And like I said, with everything coming out, I wouldn't be surprised, but probably before the end of the year, we might even get more information from the mainstream media, like the New York Times, about their the government's UFO investigation program, ATIP, And I'll also just mention that because ATIP is an acronym. ATIP is Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program.
Oh.
And that is a UFO group that is within the Pentagon. There are probably many more, but that's just one of the public ones. We could very well hear a lot more information before the end of the year, so let's keep our eyes out for that and up into the skies as well. And I think it's just something that we have to make sure we're connecting with, because this is a very real thing. This isn't not just a make believe, pretend, imaginary subject. This is something that is a very prominent, real phenomenon, and we should take seriously because it's part of our lives. It's part of us. It helps us understand who and what we are and what we're doing here. So there's a lot to glean from this. It's a very interesting and fascinating subject. So I commend you for being open to having this on your show, and I'm looking forward to seeing what people think. So I appreciate you having me.
It is fascinating, and that is why Hollywood has made movies, and but you give us concrete information, and I love that, and I am so grateful that you came on today. I know it's an hour earlier, and I can't wait to get your book. You have to contact me when it comes out, and I want to read it. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Daniel. And I just continue doing what you're doing, because you're on the right path.
Well, thank you, Mary. I've had a great time, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Okay. Well, everyone, find Daniel on Facebook or Instagram. Have a wonderful day, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you. And you as well.
Nice to meet you. Bye. Wow, that was amazing. So many stories. He's had so many experiences. Okay, I want to say thank you to Tom for joining us, and Michael, and Norma Jean, and all my friends. Before I go, which we're way past our time, I'm going to do a gemstone. So today's gemstone. So, because we have to add some light to the end. Okay, so this is an Amazonite. Can you see it? And it's a greenish stone, and it has healing benefits and properties, which include help with physical and emotional ailments. Your chakra balancing, it balances the 7 chakras, which we have throughout our body. It's especially healing for the heart chakra. Oh, I need that. It heals trauma. It gives a soothing environment and calms your nervous system and brain. So my heart. Okay. I'd like to thank you for joining me. Please like my Facebook and Instagram or Twitter page. Contact me at Mary Amy Official. Let's construct only positive thoughts, words, and actions. I'd like to mention that on next week's show, we have Angel Channeler, Peter Hansen, and he will talk all to us about angel. He's an angel whisperer. So thank you for joining me. Have a wonderful day. Bye.